So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions had a very hard-fought game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars this past Saturday in the second week of the NFL preseason, and unfortunately, they took the loss. In a 25-7 defeat, the Detroit Lions fell at home to the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 2 of the NFL preseason, and to be quite honest, it was a very difficult game to watch. The offense was very weak once again. For the second week in a row, the Detroit Lions weren't able to move the ball, weren't able to find themselves in the end zone, and weren't able to put up many points on the scoreboard, only having 121 total yards of offense in the entire day. The offense was very, very poor. However, the defense was very strong, with a lot of key players and a lot of individual members making plays and making a name for themselves as the 53-man roster cut down date approaches. A lot of players made a name for themselves. A lot of players may have saved their spot on the roster, and some may have even carved out roles on the defense that weren't earlier foreseen before this game happened. So let's start off with the offensive side of the ball. The Detroit Lions had just 96 passing yards, 35 rushing yards, took 2 sacks, but had 11 pressures from the offensive line, as well as turning the football over twice. Nate Sudfeld threw a pick while Teddy Bridgewater fumbled the football away and unfortunately lost possession for the Detroit Lions. Now, before I get too many complaints in the comments, I know that this is not the starting offense. I am very aware that many of the players that we saw on the field Saturday afternoon are not going to play significant snaps for the Detroit Lions. Ideally, Teddy Bridgewater does not play a single snap. I am aware that both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are going to be starting running backs over the guys that played. I am aware that the top 4 wide receivers did not play. Marvin Jones did not play. Josh Reynolds didn't play. Khalif Raymond didn't play. Amon-Ra St. Brown did not play. Sam Laporta, your starting tight end, did not play, and neither did your top 5 offensive line unit, right? Taylor Decker was out. Jonah Jackson was out, Frank Ragnow was out, Big V was out, as well as Penei Sewell. But along with that, also Graham Glasgow missed the game and didn't play in the preseason. That's your starting 6 offensive linemen not playing because they don't need to play. None of the offensive players are going to have a huge impact on the season this coming year, hopefully, right? Fingers crossed Josh Reynolds is not your running back one going into a week. Ideally, Chase Cota is not your leading wide receiver going into a regular season week of NFL football, but it is a good chance to evaluate individuals. And there were a couple individuals that, despite the lack of full offensive success, really did have some solid days and really at least showed some positive signs along with a lot of the negative from the offense. Now, a couple of standouts from today, that being Teddy Bridgewater. In his first ever game in a Detroit Lions uniform, I thought he played pretty well. Despite only being 5 of 11 for 34 yards, I thought that he was pretty solid. He threw quite a few good passes that weren't completed to Dylan Drummond. He had 2 where he absolutely dropped the football in a perfect spot, and it was either broken up by a defensive back very late, or the wide receiver simply wasn't able to bring it in. Teddy Bridgewater was able to escape pressure. He looked very good under pressure, despite the offensive line not giving him very much time to throw or get through reads. And I thought as an individual, Teddy Bridgewater was very, very solid. I thought Teddy Bridgewater was just a very good quarterback. And I think for the most part, he was exactly what Detroit Lions fans were looking for. Now, going into week 3 versus the Carolina Panthers, hopefully he gets a little bit more time. Hopefully he gets a little bit more chemistry with his wide receivers. And hopefully the offensive line is able to hold up a little bit better for him. And he's able to show a little bit more on the stat sheet what he's able to do. But for the most part, I thought he was pretty solid in his Detroit Lions debut. Now, Jamar Jefferson, with the 7th round pick from Brad Holmes' first ever draft class, was the leading rusher on the day. 6 carries for 16 yards. right? He made 2 or 3 players miss in the backfield on a couple different runs. And despite only picking up 2 to 3 yards on the play, he really did a lot of good things and made quite a few defenders miss. Showed good contact balance, showed the ability to be a kick and punt returner, showed the ability to pass protect, showed the ability to catch out of the backfield. And I think Jamar Jefferson, despite not making the roster the first 2 years, despite not really being a guy we've talked about a whole lot, is a prime candidate to make the roster as the 4th running back, right? Justin Jackson retired. Muhammad Ibrahim was waived because of injury, and I don't think Benny Snell is really going to replace Jamar Jefferson. I think this is a prime time for him to finally get onto the active roster because he looked really, really good after coming off of an injury early in camp. And same thing goes with Craig Reynolds. Despite only having 8 carries for 13 yards, Craig Reynolds was pretty good for the most part and was really able Craig Reynolds was really good for the most part and was able to also produce in the receiving game with 4 receptions for 29 yards. He was able to hold up in pass protection a little bit. He was really able to be a security blanket for Teddy Bridgewater throughout the first 2 quarters. I thought both of these depth running backs, despite not having great yards per carry, despite not having huge runs, and despite not really being elite rushers on the day, I thought they all showed the ability to pass protect. They showed the ability to receive out of the backfield. They showed the ability to pick up some tough yardage as well as make people miss in small areas. And for a running back 3 and 4, I think you can do a lot worse than Jamar Jefferson and Craig Reynolds. Now, Dylan Drummond was the leading wide receiver for the day. Again, when your team totally passes for 114 receiving yards, your leading receiver isn't going to be as impressive. Dylan Drummond, 2 receptions for 29 yards, had 5 targets on the day and wasn't quite able to connect with Teddy Bridgewater on all of them, but did have a decent day for the undrafted rookie from Eastern Michigan. And then Antoine Green had just 1 catch, but only had 1 target and averaged, of course, 18 yards per reception on his 1 catch for 18 yards. Chase Cota, the leading wide receiver coming into the day, had the lone receiving touchdown, but apart from that, he really didn't accomplish too much for the Detroit Lions, nor did the rest of the passing attack. Now, let's take a look at the defense. The defense was significantly better, and they were the strength of the Detroit Lions in week 2. Their pass rush was phenomenal. They had 3 sacks. James Houston by himself had 8 pressures, and the defense alone had several more than that, although I could not find the official number. The Detroit Lions had 1 takeaway, that being the interception from Stephen Gilmore in the first quarter. And overall, the defense played really, really well, only allowing 3 points in the first quarter, 9 points in the second quarter, 6 points in the third quarter, and 7 points in the fourth. That is about half a touchdown, 1 touchdown a quarter, and they really were able to keep the Detroit Lions in it until the very end of the football game, when the offense, of course, failed to score until the third quarter and only scored 1 time on the day. Now, I really, really want to take a look at James Houston. This is a player that a lot of people thought was going to get cut. There are people in the media, there are people that are Detroit Lions fans that said James Houston would not make the active roster. James Houston in the preseason now has 13 pressures. In the last game alone, he had 8 pressures, 4 tackles for loss, and a sack on the quarterback. He was double teamed and still came away with a sack, and that's while playing some off-ball linebacker. He was playing the sim. He did not rush every time. They dropped him back into coverage. They let him do other more versatile things, and he still came away with 8 pressures, 4 TFLs, and a sack on the day. James Houston is the secret weapon for this Detroit Lions defense. Why he's still playing in the preseason? I'm not totally sure. Is it because we have so much depth at the edge rusher position that somebody has to play? Probably. But James Houston will undoubtedly make the roster. James Houston will undoubtedly be a starter, or at least a really big role player on defense. And he will be a massive pass rushing asset for the Lions defensive line in 2023. And I'm very excited to see him continue to work. Now, another player that I thought was very impressive was Jack Campbell. Had 7 tackles, didn't have any flashy tackles for loss, didn't really have any big PBUs or any massive plays, but he did all of the little things right. He was always the first player to the ball, always there to support in the run, and was always in his position where he was able to make a play, right? He was never out of position. He never gave up the big play. Despite only playing 2 quarters, he did have 7 tackles and looked really, really good. He was always around the football. He was always getting his hands on the on the ball carrier. He was always able to impact the play positively, despite not necessarily making the flashy play, despite not having a pick six or a massive turnover forced or a massive hit stick. He was kind of the quiet guy in the background that made the defense work, that made the defense really good, and kept the Detroit Lions in the game for a large part of the first and second quarters. Now, the last player I want to take a look at today is Tracy Walker, officially returning from his Achilles injury. I thought Tracy Walker played very well. He played just one quarter for the Detroit Lions, but had 5 tackles from the safety position, as well as a pass defended that eventually led to the interception by Stephen Gilmore, right? He tipped it up. Stephen Gilmore was able to come down with it, but Tracy Walker made that play, right? Tracy Walker got to the spot. Tracy Walker picked that football off. It just so happened that the contact from the receiver was able to jar it loose, popped up in the air, and a different player was able to come down with it afterwards, but Tracy Walker made that play. Tracy Walker, his comeback from his injury, has looked really good throughout training camp. Probably will be the starting, or probably will be the second or third string safety, right? He's probably going to sit behind Kirby Joseph. He'll likely sit behind CJ Gardner-Johnson, but with the amount of sets and the amount of 3 safety sets the Lions like to run, I don't think Tracy Walker is going to be kind of pushed to the back, right? I don't think Tracy Walker is going to be an afterthought in this defense, as he was a captain last year. I think he will return to be a captain in 2023. He might be a weak side linebacker. He might be just the third safety, but I think he is going to have a role in the defense, even if he's not a starter, even if he doesn't play 50+% of snaps. I think he's going to have a limited role. I think he's going to have an important role on the defense, and I think he's going to be a really good leader and will get some time at safety to show what he can do, because Tracy Walker is a very good safety, and despite Kirby Joseph's emergence, despite CJ Gardner-Johnson being great, despite Brian Branch's emergence, Tracy Walker is still the captain of that defense, and he is still a absolutely phenomenal playmaker for the Lions, and they can't afford to take that kind of leadership off the field. Now, a couple other players I want to talk about, guys that had smaller days, but still I thought were very positive days. First off, John Kaminsky. He could have had his own slide. He was really, really good. He had a sack. He had a couple of tackles for loss. He had a pass defended. He was everything John Kaminsky is. Ate up double teams, took away a lot of pressure from a lot of other guys. And when John Kaminsky came off the field, it was very evident that John Kaminsky was no longer on the field. The contain got worse. Pass rush slowed down a little bit. John Kaminsky made that defense run on the defensive line, and he was really, really good. Josh Pascal was really good as well, had half a sack, almost had a second sack, was able to come off the ball really well, was able to show some power, was able to show some finesse, was able to get a pressure or two, as well as bring the quarterback down once. Ifeatu Melifonwu was really good as a special teamer, was really good at the gunner position on special teams, on punt coverage, on kickoff coverage, and if he's healthy, I do think he will be the starting gunner alongside Starling Thomas IV. Now, I thought the 3 defensive backs again had really good days, despite giving up a couple big plays in the process. Right, you have, of course, Starling Thomas, number 49, the UDFA from the University of Alabama, Birmingham. The UAB Blazer alumni is currently a depth player on the Detroit Lions roster. He has 4.3 speed. He's been scrappy all year, and he's been really good in the preseason. Did get beat once or twice, but that happens. The Jacksonville Jaguars threw the ball a lot and tested our DBs a lot. And despite giving up a couple of big plays, I thought Starling Thomas came back and was really good. Despite giving up a big play or two, I thought Stephen Gilmore was really good. Obviously gave up the big play in the beginning, but was in really good tight coverage and then came back with a PBU in the red zone, as well as an interception on another contested ball that he was very close to. Now, Brandon Joseph didn't have any massive plays this week, didn't have any game-sealing interceptions, didn't have any pass breakups per se, but he was one-on-one in a red zone fade and was able to hold off the defender for an incomplete pass there and was really able to have a good day once again. I think all 3 of these UDFA defensive backs once again had a really strong day on the field, and I think all 3 of them are still having their arguments to be on the 53-man roster. Brandon Joseph obviously has that a little bit harder than the cornerbacks, but I think all 3 of them could end up as some kind of role on the roster, especially if they make it through waivers and make it to the practice squad. I think all 3 of them will be on the team if they are allowed, but I think all of these players had very, very strong days. Now, overall, I think the offense is not something that people should be concerned about, right? The offense, yes, it was slow, but first and even some second string guys weren't playing. None of the playmakers on the field on Saturday are going to be offensive playmakers for the Lions. And the ones on defense that are going to be defensive playmakers, guys the Lions are going to rely on, made plays that they were supposed to make. Were able to be foundational pieces for the Detroit Lions, and were able to lead the Detroit Lions to the small successes that they had on Saturday. Overall, The defense I thought was really good for the most part. The offense could use a lot more execution work, but what can you expect out of a third string offense with a quarterback that's been there for a week with very limited offensive line reps and very little offensive line depth around the entirety of the league? So with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Let me know your big takeaways from week 2 of the NFL preseason. Let me know what players you were impressed by, what players you were let down by, and what you're looking forward to as we emerge into the third week of the preseason as the Lions travel to Carolina to play the Panthers. And of course, what players and what plays are you looking forward to seeing in week 3 versus the Carolina Panthers? I'd be very curious to hear all that down in the comments below. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.